In this video I show you how I built these super simple silos for use in any modern day or sci-fi wargame setting. Welcome to Cheap and Easy Wargaming, where we keep the hobby fun, fast and affordable. As I said, these silos are very versatile. They can be used in a range of settings from grimdark to post-apocalyptic, and I hope to be using them soon for a zombie survival RPG using the Savage Worlds rule set with the Mythic Games Master emulator. But they can also very easily be scaled for Gaslands or pretty much any other game that you want to play. So last night I decided to surprise my girlfriend by offering to cook dinner. Normally she wouldn't dream of eating anything I've cooked, but last night I really did insist. So 1 candlelit beans on toast, followed by Pinot Grigio later, and it just so happens I have a spare can. Now back in my day, by which I mean Warhammer 40,000 2nd edition, where if you wanted terrain you had no choice but to build it yourself. If you wanted pipework with a bend in it, you had to use these flexi straws. And obviously no matter how well you paint it, it's always going to look like a bendy straw. So looking for a cheap and easy way around it, I came up with these twisty fidget toys. They're super cheap to buy in the shops, and even cheaper if you get them at car boot sales. I think this one cost me 20 pence. And I used quite a few of the links on the Tatooine build I made a few weeks ago. The other difficulty I had with pipework was finding plastic tubes, especially now plastic straws aren't a thing anymore. But even back when they were a bit too flimsy. So trying to come up with a solution for this that would be cheap, easy to get hold of, and something that most people would just throw away. I don't believe there's a single person watching this video that doesn't have a box of felt tip pens in their house somewhere where half of them don't even work. And to really seal the deal, they are the perfect size to match up with the fidget toys. As always, they made short work of my cheap Stanley blades, so next time I'll definitely use a cheaper brand of felt tip pen. Obviously I didn't actually buy these, my kids won them in a Christmas raffle at school. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but they were really good. Line up your pipe bend with your felt tip pen, and then just simply mark where you need to cut it. I say simply, even though I make it look very difficult here. I would have preferred to use a hacksaw to cut through the felt tip pens here instead of keep eating into all of my blades, but as I'm in the process of sorting out my tools so I can be more organized for these videos, I seem to have lost it. And here you can see that the fidget toys and the felt tip pens are the perfect size. So just to add a bit of realism and detail to the pipes, I'm going to use the felt tip lid to cut some rings, and these can be used intermittently along the pipes and to cover any joints. If I wasn't doing this for a video, I would just use super glue, but as I'm trying to be quick, I'm going to use the hot glue. Obviously this is going to leave a big goopy mess. My intention at this point was to paint it to look like bad welding or some kind of ooze leaking, but I never got around to doing that. You guys definitely should though. This is a rare shot of me doing something fiddly with hot glue and not burning myself. Then it's just a case of gluing the bend onto the top and then just double checking that your ridiculous measuring technique earlier on didn't backfire and go wrong somehow. And then when you realise that it inevitably did go wrong, trying to figure out how you can undo this without anybody realising you've made a mistake. It turns out I cut it just a little bit too short, so I decided I'm going to use another one of those rings from the felt tip pen lid to add to the bottom and make it look like that was the plan right from the very start. More hot glue that I genuinely intended to do something artistic with later. And waste not, want not, I decided to use the offcut from earlier to make just one more short pipe, just to add a little bit more needless grimdark 40k detail. This one will be quite weak as it's not going to be glued the entire length of the pipe, so make sure to add some extra glue where it touches the other pipe just to give it an extra bit of stability. I'm sure most people are aware that you can make pretty convincing ladders from cheap plastic tennis rackets. This one that I'm using I found in a park. It was already broken into little pieces, which meant I could put it in my pocket and my girlfriend didn't know that I'd got it. This is another area where the hot glue really did make a mess on the final product. I really did run out of time at the end though, so I couldn't devote any more time to trying to improve the paint job. As I mentioned, this short pipe that's sticking out away from the body of the silo is going to be quite weak and prone to breaking off. So in order to negate that, I am going to use this piece of plastic. You could easily just use a piece of card as well, just to glue to the bottom and just give it an extra bit of stability. While I was out walking one day, I came across this piece of grimy wire mesh and did what any normal person would do by picking it up and taking it back to my car. I can't even count how many times I've pierced my skin on this mesh during that walk home and the time that it's been stored at the back of the shed. But I am completely up to date on my hepatitis jabs, so what could possibly go wrong? Wasn't entirely sure which scale I needed to do this in. I know most people use 28 or 32mm models, whereas I just use Green Army Men scale, which I've now come to realise isn't even a scale because they're all over the place. I figured the best thing to do is just eyeball it. It's my favourite technique and it rarely lets me down. To be fair, in this case, I think it did let me down. It seems a little bit too high when there's no models on there. It works okay for the Army Men scale, but maybe a little bit too high for the 40k. But as my boss always says, it's only a mistake if you don't learn from it. As always, I make these mistakes so you don't have to. I just use the pliers to bend in these little offshoots. You never know, one day I might make some friends, and if they come round to play, then I don't want anyone snagging an artery on one of these things. I've never tried gluing metal to metal with a hot glue gun before. I honestly didn't expect it to work, so I just really went to town on the amount of hot glue that I used. This is another decision I'd later regret when it comes to the painting stage, as it turned out to look a big gunky mess. I did use the hot glue just to cover those little spikes that I've just bent in. It was a spur of the moment decision and actually didn't need to be done at all. Next, to add a bit of detail or maybe an objective point, I wanted to stick a control box panel on the side here. This is just a randomly cut block of foam. This piece came from a curtain pole packaging, and I knew that if I held on to it long enough, it would come in useful one day. Onto the front of that, I glued a piece of card that's just slightly smaller to represent a door, and then a tiny piece of card to represent a door handle. In order to break up the plainness of the rest of the walls of the silos, I cut out some more random plastic squares. You could also use cardboard for this stage as well. I just bend them by hand a little so they've got a slight curve to them. Then just using a pin and the offcut of foam, I start to poke some small dents through the plastic, and hopefully when they're stuck on and painted, these will look like rivets. A blob of glue to hold them in place, and that curve that we've already made should help it to stay where it should. Also in the Tatooine video from a few weeks ago, I made this mixture of PVA glue, water, sand and brown paint. I've kept it in a jar under the sink with the lid on, and 3 weeks later it's still fine to use. So I used it to coat the base where the pipework meets the ground, just to add a bit of texture to that. And then just wanted to spread some random bits around to represent rust and weathering. For some reason I opted to do this with the stirrer stick. That reason more than likely being just laziness. I have heard other terrain makers say that when it comes to rust, less is more. And I am definitely going to follow that advice next time I do rust. These little things are called hammer beads. They are super cheap and super easy to get hold of. If you have daughters, then you probably already have a load of these in your house. They're a soft plastic which can be melted with an iron, which makes them really easy to cut. So I like that. It doesn't keep damaging my blades. And they're also great for just adding little details here and there. Here I'm just using them to create the illusion of a hinge. And then it's ready for priming. What I didn't want is to just paint these black and then dry brush silver and just have them look like every other piece of terrain I have. I wanted to try and add a little bit more colour and variety to the table just to break it up, make it a bit more visually interesting. This green was just way too shiny for what I wanted though. So I decided to tone that down with just some Army Painter green. And when I googled silos for some inspiration, I did see there was some painted a slightly off-white with the rust effect, and I thought that looked really good. I decided to give it a go myself without researching how to actually do it, and I probably should have painted over a brown base coat rather than a black, as I'd done here. Luckily, I want everything to look grimy and dirty at the end anyway, so I can just get away with telling people that's how I meant it to look. I try using this cheap red just to mark out some of the details, pipework, but as you can see that really doesn't work very well at all. I'm nothing without my principles, so I try an even cheaper red, and this one does work a little bit better. Now the white stripe can give that another coat. Again, I'll be honest with you, at this point I was thinking I am just going to have to redo the whole colour scheme on that white, so I'm not really sure I'm going to be able to pull that back at all. Back to good old Army Painter silver to be able to paint the pipework, ladders, and then start adding some wear and tear to these panels. and hoping that once I get some more details and colours onto the white one, that it's going to start to look a little bit more like a piece of terrain and less like a baked bean can that's been badly painted. A technique that I do like to use for things like weathering and rust is using a ripped up sponge to dab on. Just remember, once the sponge is loaded with paint, you want to dab it onto some tissue in order to get any excess paint off before you start dabbing. For the rust technique, I just use two colours. So I start off with a reddy brown colour, and again just dabbing that on with a sponge in the same way as we did earlier. Again, remembering to remove any excess paint from the sponge before you start dabbing. To really bring some colour in, I'm going to use this mustardy yellow, I believe it's yellow ochre, just to paint this box on the side and the handrails. Hopefully this will give it a more realistic industrial look. I'm going to use silver again to paint the hinges, the door handles, and again just add some wear and tear to the doors and panels here. As promised, we're going to finish off the rust weathering using the same dabbing motion with this bright orange paint. I can hear you all screaming at your phones right now saying, no, it's too bright, don't do it. It's fine, trust me, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm a trained professional. It does seem very bright when it first goes on, but just keep dabbing, and as it dries, it will darken. This is something I made a while ago, and I wanted to give the metal this kind of oxidized bluey-greeny color just to break it up a little bit. And I thought that technique might look quite good on the pipework here as well. Mixing the color was a bit of guesswork. I used this light blue and a sap green, and then just added some white. From there, it was just a case of stippling it on with a brush around any joints in the pipework where it looks like something might be leaking. And while it does look a bit bright right now, we are going to add a wash to this next, just to tone everything down. Just before I do that, I'm going to add a random marking to the side of this silo. I don't know why, it was just a moment of inspiration. Makes no sense really. And while I'm feeling inspired, I'm also going to add some details to this yellow control box here. That does say danger, though we can't really make it out. What would grimdark be without some hazard stripe? And then I try to also affect some kind of danger hazard sign on the front. That's supposed to be a little lightning with an arrow thing there. It's random little details like this that really make the model stand out. As promised, we're going to give everything a wash. So I'm just going to use a cheap brown acrylic paint mixed heavily with some water, and then just a dab of washing up liquid. Why the washing up liquid, I hear you ask? I'm not really sure, but other people that are better than I am do it, so I'm just going to do that. Possibly something to do with helping them mix, but I don't know if that's true or not, so don't quote me on it. Using a silver marker pen, I'm just going to highlight these rivets, and then I'm going to put all of my hopes in this wash, toning this white down in order to make it look like a passable piece of industrial terrain. I do the same as well to the green. Unfortunately, after 2 coats of the brown wash over the white, I still wasn't happy with it. It still wasn't toned down enough for my liking. So what I did do, but forgot to film, was do exactly the same again with a black wash. As I've said, normally I would just dry brush everything silver and then add a brown rot wash and rust to it. And as I only solo play, this has always been more than enough for me. As I was making this as a tutorial and wanted something that I could also use later in games and for background scenery in other videos, I really wanted something that was a bit more colourful and unique and stood out a bit more. If I could go back and do this again, I wouldn't choose green and white. I don't know what colours I would choose, but it certainly wouldn't be these two. I would also either not add the chicken wire railings or make it a little bit shorter. There are some things here I really like. I really like the pipework, and I might just go to town on that with another tutorial later. Building on that grimdark Necromunda future factory kind of vibe. And I actually like the yellow box as well with the hazard stripes. I might use those in more things later. As always, just to finish off with some glamour shots of how these can be used in some different settings. Here the Ninja Turtles are fighting Shredder over some ooze production factory, fending off a horde of zombies at a disused oil refinery whilst trying to find precious resources. This is a scenario I'm going to be playing through myself shortly. There's always your typical 40k Necromunda aesthetic, and as said earlier, you could use them for gaslands. They could very easily be converted to the right scale for that. As usual, thank you for watching. If you are still watching at this point, thank you so much for your support. If you would consider giving this video a like and possibly subscribing to the channel, I would really appreciate it. It motivates me to go on making more videos just like this, but also proves to my children I'm not a complete loser. Either way, way, until next time, keep being cheap and easy.